At some point, you've stood in your kitchen holding a package you barely remember ordering, staring at it like it belongs to someone else. The label has your name on it, your address on it, your email has the receipt, and still your brain's like, wait, why is this here? You cut the tape, pull the thing out, and you do that little pause where you expect a rush. Not fireworks, just something that says, nice, this was worth it. But nothing shows up, and that's when the moment gets uncomfortable. You don't feel excited. You don't feel satisfied. You mostly feel confused, like you just inherited somebody else's impulse. And then you ask yourself the same quiet question you've asked before. Why did I buy this? It's not a dramatic question either. It's the tired, honest one. The kind you ask while you're already deciding whether it's going in a drawer, getting returned, or turning into clutter you learn to ignore. You try to answer it with the usual explanations. It was on sale, I might need it, I deserve it, it'll be useful. And sometimes those are technically true, but they don't explain the part that matters, which is why it felt urgent in the moment. Because the truth is, you didn't wake up that morning planning to buy that thing. It usually happens in the cracks of your day, 5 minutes between tasks, late at night, after a rough conversation, or while you're half watching something and scrolling without thinking. That moment isn't about self-control, it isn't about discipline, and it definitely isn't because you're bad with money. If you were bad with money, you wouldn't feel the confusion, you'd just move on. But you're noticing the pattern, and noticing is the first sign your brain knows something's off. What's actually happening is simple, but it's not obvious when you're living inside it. That purchase wasn't a single decision. It was the final step in a system that warmed you up, nudged you, and removed every speed bump that used to protect you. Think about how buying used to work. You had to go somewhere, pick something up, stand in line, hand over cash, and watch it leave your hand. Now you can spend money in silence, in bed, with one thumb, and your bank account won't even feel it until later. That's not an accident, that's design. The less friction there is, the more often you act on impulse, because your brain doesn't have to cross a pause point where logic can catch up. And it's been quietly steering your behavior for years. Not with one giant trick, but with 1,000 small ones, like notifications that hit when you're bored, limited time timers that make you feel late, and people also bought carousels that make you second-guess yourself. Even the language is built to move you. Add to cart feels harmless, like you're not committing, but it's the first step of a ramp. Then it's free shipping if you spend a little more, then it's a coupon that expires tonight, then it's one-click checkout, then it's done. Here's the part that stings. The system doesn't need you to be reckless, it just needs you to be tired. It just needs you to be slightly stressed, slightly unsure, slightly worn down, because that's when your brain stops optimizing and starts escaping. And if you've ever said, I'll just be stronger next time, you already know how that plays out. You'll win for a bit, then you'll have a day where everything stacks up, and your willpower gets outnumbered by convenience, speed, and the promise of relief. So today, I'm going to prove what's going on with math, psychology, and mechanics, not motivation posters. My name is Andy, and we're going to take this apart so clearly that you'll recognize the exact moment the buy urge gets built inside you. By the end of this video, you'll understand why willpower keeps failing you, and why that failure isn't some personal flaw. It's what happens when a human brain runs into a machine that's built to trigger action faster than conscious thought. And we'll do the part most people avoid, the numbers. Because that random $40 buy isn't just $40, it's $40 plus the repeat purchases it trains, plus the future options it quietly steals. And that adds up in a way your brain never calculates in the moment. Here's the promise. This isn't about shaming you, and it isn't about telling you to stop buying coffee or cancel streaming apps. It's about showing you why normal, responsible people end up spending in ways that don't match what they say they want. We're going to break down the invisible forces that turn normal people into chronic spenders, even when they swear they're trying to save. And once you understand those forces, something interesting happens. The urge loses its power because it stops feeling magical and starts feeling predictable. So let's start with the first lie almost everyone believes about spending. Most people believe they buy things because they want them. That's the first lie. In reality, most purchases are made to resolve tension, not desire. And that tension usually has nothing to do with the product. Let me show you how this actually works. Think about the last thing you bought that you regret, Not the big, obvious mistake, the small one. The $40 gadget, the extra subscription, the clothes still in the closet with tags on them. At the moment you bought it, your brain wasn't thinking, I want this item. It was thinking, I want this feeling to stop. Stress, boredom, insecurity, decision fatigue. Your brain was trying to close an open emotional loop as fast as possible. Buying is just the shortcut it knows best. This is where the psychology starts. Your brain has two systems making decisions. One is slow, logical, and deliberate. The other is fast, emotional, and reactive. The problem is the fast one controls your wallet. When you're tired, overwhelmed, or uncertain, your brain looks for relief, not optimization. Spending creates immediate certainty. You click buy. The decision is over. The tension drops. That relief is the reward, not the product. And here's the part nobody tells you. That relief hits your brain the same way finishing a task does. Your brain treats spending like productivity. That's why buying something can feel weirdly satisfying even when you know it's unnecessary. Your brain thinks you solved a problem. But the problem wasn't the lack of the item. The problem was internal discomfort. And because the relief comes before the regret, the behavior gets reinforced. This is basic behavioral conditioning. Relief first, consequences later. Now let's add math. Every time you buy something impulsively, you're not just spending money, you're teaching your brain a rule. The rule sounds like this. When I feel discomfort, spending fixes it. The brain doesn't care if that rule ruins your finances long term. It only cares that it worked once. Now repeat that loop hundreds of times across years. Stress at work, buy food, bored at night, scroll in order, feeling behind in life, upgrade something. The purchases change. The pattern doesn't. And this is where people get stuck. They try to fix the behavior with discipline, but the behavior isn't the problem. The emotional trigger is. Here's another layer most people miss. Modern life produces more cognitive stress than your brain evolved to handle. Endless choices, endless comparison, endless information. Decision fatigue builds silently. By the time you're done working, your brain doesn't want to decide anything anymore. So it defaults to the easiest, most familiar solution. Spend. That's why so much unnecessary spending happens at night. Not because you want more, but because your brain is exhausted. Now let's talk about identity because this is where things escalate. Humans don't buy products, they buy versions of themselves. Every purchase contains an implied identity upgrade. The clothes promise confidence, the tech promises competence, the furniture promises stability, the car promises status. You aren't buying the object, you're buying the person you imagine yourself becoming after owning it. And here's the brutal truth. That person never arrives. Because identity doesn't come from possessions. It comes from behavior. So the gap stays open. And that gap creates discomfort, which leads to more spending. This is the identity loop. You feel slightly behind who you think you should be. You buy something to close the gap doesn't close. You feel behind again. Now layer in social comparison. You don't need to want what other people have. You just need to see it often enough. Your brain is wired to measure itself relative to others. And social media turns that dial to maximum. You see highlight reels, not balance sheets. Outcomes, not trade-offs. Your brain updates its definition of normal upward, silently. That new normal becomes expensive. And once something feels normal, not having it feels like deprivation. That's the trick. Marketing doesn't create desire. It creates dissatisfaction with your current state. Now let's make this concrete. Imagine two people earning the same income. Person A keeps their lifestyle stable. Person B upgrades slightly every year. Nothing dramatic, just a little better apartment, a little nicer car, slightly more convenience. After 10 years, person B isn't happier, but their fixed costs are permanently higher. Now something interesting happens. When income fluctuates or stress hits, person B has no margin. So spending becomes emotional relief, not enjoyment. They're buying just to feel okay. This is how lifestyle creep turns into lifestyle pressure, and pressure destroys rational decision-making. Now let's talk about the trap nobody sees. Most people think impulse spending is spontaneous. It isn't. It's predictable. Your brain is most vulnerable when three things line up: fatigue, uncertainty, and delayed gratification. When rewards are far away and stress is immediate, the brain chooses now over later. This is why saving feels hard and spending feels easy. Saving is invisible progress. Spending is immediate feedback. The brain always prefers immediate feedback. So what happens? You keep buying things that promise to fix feelings they were never designed to fix. And then you feel guilty. Guilt creates stress. Stress triggers more spending. That's the cycle. Now let's zoom out. This system isn't accidental. Companies aren't just selling products. They're selling emotional regulation. Subscription models remove friction. One-click purchasing removes reflection. Limited time offers create urgency. The goal isn't satisfaction, it's repeat behavior. A satisfied customer stops buying. An anxious customer doesn't. Now here's the most important shift. You don't need more discipline. You need fewer emotional triggers. The solution isn't trying harder. It's changing the environment. When you remove friction from spending, you need to add friction back intentionally. That's not weakness. That's strategy. Because willpower is a finite resource. Systems last. Here's how the math actually changes. Every unnecessary purchase isn't just the price you paid, it's the future value you gave up. $50 invested annually over 30 years at 8% becomes tens of thousands. That's not motivational fluff, that's arithmetic. So when you buy something you don't want, you aren't just losing money, you're trading future freedom for present relief. Once you see that trade clearly, the decision feels different. Now let's talk about the final layer, because this is where everything clicks. Most people are using money as a coping mechanism. They don't realize it because it's socially acceptable. Nobody questions shopping as stress relief, but it's still avoidance. You aren't solving the underlying problem, you're numbing it. And numbing requires escalation. The first purchase feels good, the next feels less effective, so you spend more. This is how people end up surrounded by things they don't care about and still feel empty. The purchases were never the point. Now, here's the reframe that changes behavior. Instead of asking, "Do I want this?" ask, "What feeling am I trying to buy?" If the answer isn't joy or utility, pause. Because money is best used as a tool, not a sedative. And here's the quiet win. Once you stop using spending to regulate emotions, your money suddenly starts working. Not because you became disciplined, but because you stopped fighting yourself. You weren't broken. You were responding rationally to an irrational environment. So here's the takeaway. You keep buying things you don't want because your brain is seeking relief, identity, and certainty in a world that constantly destabilizes all three. That behavior isn't a moral failure. It's a predictable outcome. When you design your life to reduce stress, comparison, and decision fatigue, the spending urge fades on its own. And when money stops being your emotional safety valve, it becomes something far more powerful: freedom. If this made you see your past purchases differently, stick around, because understanding the psychology is the first step to finally keeping the money you earn. And if you're listening to this thinking, "Okay, I get it, but I still feel like I'm the one clicking," you're right, you are. But the point is, you're clicking inside a setup that's engineered to make clicking feel like relief, and engineered to make not clicking feel like you're missing something. Because the real opponent isn't the product. It's the timing. It's the moment you're most drained, most uncertain, most overloaded, and the easiest possible solution shows up right on your screen like it's doing you a favor. Here's a simple test. If you only shopped when you felt calm and clear, how much would you actually buy? If you only bought things after a good night of sleep, after eating, after a walk, after your brain wasn't fried, how many of those purchases would still feel urgent? That's not a moral question, it's a mechanics question. Your brain doesn't process value the same way when you're stressed. Stress shrinks your timeline. It makes later feel fake and now feel like the only real place you can live. And that's why the system loves monthly payments, autopay, and anything that breaks the full price into tiny pieces. If something costs $100, your brain notices. If it costs $25 4 times, your brain shrugs because each bite feels small even though the total is the same. Same thing with subscriptions. A single $10 subscription doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like background noise. But stack 6 of those and now you've got $60 a month leaking out of your life. That's $720 a year every year for stuff you might not even use. And here's the math people never connect to that leak. If that same $60 a month got invested instead, and it compounded for 30 years at 8%, you're looking at roughly $81,000. Not because $60 is huge, but because time is huge. That's the part your brain never feels in the moment. So when you tell yourself, it's only $60, what you're really saying is, I'm okay trading future options for present quiet. And again, that's not shame, that's clarity. You can still choose it, but at least you're choosing it with the full price tag attached. Now let's talk about why the regret shows up after the box arrives. Because this is a big clue. For a lot of people, the best part of buying isn't owning. It's the anticipation. It's the scrolling, the comparing, the imagining, the moment you hit buy and your brain goes, finally, something's handled. That's why the item feels flat when it shows up. The purchase already did its job, it gave you relief, certainty, and a little identity boost, and by the time the package hits your doorstep, the emotional payoff has already been cashed. And if you've ever had a bunch of tabs open, bouncing between options, adding things to your cart, removing them, re-adding them, that wasn't shopping. That was your brain trying to regulate itself. It was trying to turn an anxious mind into a decisive mind, using products as the tool. So if you want the spending to slow down, you don't start by arguing with yourself in the checkout screen. You start by recognizing the trigger earlier before the cart even exists. You catch the moment you're about to shop for a feeling. That's where that reframe matters. What feeling am I trying to buy? If the answer is relief, validation, control, distraction, or belonging, you've just found the real purchase. And you can't fix a feeling with an object for long. So the loop keeps demanding more. This is also where environment beats effort. If your phone has your card saved, your address saved, your favorite stores, bookmarked, and your app's trained to pull you back in, you've basically built a spending machine that lives in your pocket. Of course it wins when you're tired. So you flip the system. You add friction where companies removed it. You make spending require a second step. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. You make the default harder, so your future self doesn't have to wrestle with temptation at midnight. That can be as simple as making yourself wait one day before any non-essential purchase, even if it's on sale. You can still buy it tomorrow. But that one day forces your brain out of the emotional lane and back into the logical lane. If you still want it tomorrow, cool. If you forget it existed, that's your answer. And you can use the same psychology in your favor with saving. Make saving automatic and spending manual. Make your investment transfer happen right after you get paid, so the money disappears before your brain can assign it a job as emotional relief. Because once money stays available, your brain treats it like an option to feel better, and it will use it. Not because you're irresponsible, but because the brain hates open loops, and money feels like a universal loop closer. One more thing, and this is the system critique that nobody wants to say out loud. A lot of companies don't actually optimize for your happiness. They optimize for your repeat behavior. That's why it's always limited time, always almost sold out, always recommended for you, always pushing you to act fast before you can think. So the win isn't becoming some perfectly disciplined robot. The win is building a life where your brain doesn't need to buy relief so often. Less decision fatigue, less comparison, more real recovery, more boredom that doesn't get instantly medicated by scrolling. And when you do spend, you spend on purpose. You buy things that match your values, not your stress level. You buy because it's useful or genuinely joyful, not because you're trying to patch a feeling that needs a different kind of attention. That's how you get freedom without turning your life into a punishment. You stop treating money like a sedative, and you start treating it like a tool that buys time, options, and calm. If you want more videos like this, where we break money down into mechanics you can actually use, stick around and subscribe. Because once you can see the system, you can beat the system, and you can finally keep more of what you earn.